GoJo and Golic, Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield back with us, holding it down in the DraftKings studio in Boston. We are brought to you by Wrangler, made for the ride of life. Save 15% on your first Wrangler.com order, promo code GoJo15. Great show coming up. As always, download, subscribe, rate, review. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on DraftKings.com, the DraftKings YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. Plenty to get to coming off a jam-packed NFL weekend. We got the all-weekend team as well. We had FCS football. We got plenty going on in other sports here. Statues on Notre Dame's campus. I am currently out in New York getting ready to do something with our friends over at Meadowlark Media and our good buddy Pablo Torre at Pablo Torre Finds Out. Yet somehow that nice new studio that they've got over there, I can't make use of. So instead, I am in my hotel room here right now, surrounded by flakes of croissant dust and the random other snacks that I get at a hotel. Instead, you know how it goes with all the travel that you do. You basically subsist a bunch of weird, like airport snacks or hotel snacks throughout the time period there. And the room just becomes sort of a breeding ground for all of it.
Oh, it really does. And I would try and plan, depending on where my game is, my Sunday night game, if it's on the West Coast, I know I have to start this show, which is live Eastern 8 to 10 at 5 o'clock. Or, you know, if I'm in the 6 o'clock, time zone, I know I can't get anything to eat in that morning. So I'll try and make sure I get something before I go do my game, like a bar or something, so I have it in the morning. So I'm at least set for that in the morning. And then when fortunate enough every now and then to do an East Coast game, when the show starts at the, I'm getting up at that normal time, like you are in New York, where, the live 8 a.m., I make sure I get up early enough to go down and have breakfast at the hotel, get me a nice breakfast before the show. So you had the ability to do that this morning, and it sounds like you did not do that.
No, I did do that, but the only option I had was the lobby coffee bar because I was not going outside. Like in the winter or when it's raining outside and your dog decides, hey, when you go to let them out, it's just too bad outside and I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
That is the level of rain that we've got going on outside in New York right now, where I was not about to walk out and make myself miserable in the name of going to get food when I could get a nice flaky croissant.
By the way, the fact that, because it's the same thing's happening in Boston right now, so it's like all up and down the East Coast, it's just torrential downpouring. This time of year, it makes me so angry when this happens because I'm like, why can't it just be a little bit colder and be festive snow? But instead, we just got a torrential downpour. There's nothing festive about that.
Yeah, but do you want to waste your first snow like this? Because you only get one festive snow and then the rest of them are miserable snows.
Yeah,
because then you get all the sand and salt dumped down there and then it all starts to look mucky out there. And then you go down the path of, okay, now we're in winter and it doesn't end until we get to like April or early May even sometimes. So do you want to cash that chip in this quick, Jesse, is my question.
I mean, I like snow. My feeling is that, so it's still cold out. It's like in the 40s. Like it's still cold. It's not like it's like in the 60s and it's raining. My vibe in the winter is if it's gonna be cold and gray and gross, I'd rather have snow. Like just let it snow.
My thought right before my wife and I left South Bend, because we stay there always through Halloween, it snowed like crazy on Halloween. But we knew it wasn't going to stick, right? Because it was still warm enough out where it wasn't going to stick. So I'm okay with that. But it's when you get to, people talk about the perma cloud. It's like when you get that permafrost on that layer of snow and ice on the ground that once you get to that point when it's not going to disappear until spring. And I know you're not there yet. Mike, I wanted to ask, are you in a hotel that does not have a restaurant? Is that what I'm gathering?
The restaurant wasn't like open and functioning by the time I got there. And I was going to have to wait a little bit too long here. I was trying to get some other things done this morning in the lead up to the show, as we've got the Doppler radar now posted up on here.
Yeah.
So you've got your daily dose enough weather from GoJo and Golic here. Why don't we focus less on weather and my breakfast habits and more on what the hell happened to the Jacksonville Jaguars last night in Sunday Night Football? We know they're not going to be the biggest story coming off yesterday, and we'll get to the Cowboys debacle and how disappointing that late window was. But we had Sunday Night Football last night, Dad, and the Baltimore Ravens winning is not surprising, right? They're one of the best teams in the NFL. They're currently in position to be the 1 seed in the AFC. They've been playing like that all year, and up until last night, they had been about as healthy as we've seen the Baltimore Ravens late in the season for the last few years. But just as big of the story, we always do that thing of, did such and such team win the game or did the other team lose the game? Last night felt an awful lot like Jacksonville went out and lost that game at every critical juncture between multiple mistakes by Trevor Lawrence, fumbles lost by that team, and then the complete inability of Brandon McManus and that field goal unit for Jacksonville to hit anything in the first half of that game. They left so many points out in critical junctures despite largely outplaying the Baltimore Ravens for large portions of that first half.
Yeah, McManus 0 for 2 on field goals, and you mentioned Trevor Lawrence fumbled twice and lost both fumbles. So certainly the mistakes, hurt them on that side. But then on the other side, Mike, I've been part of it very, very rarely. There's a couple of games, and this is one of them, where as a defender, you just cringe if you're going to watch tape of it. Because to get run on for that many yards, 42 carries, 251 yards Baltimore rushed for. So while Jacksonville made the mistakes, I'm with you on that. But Jacksonville could not stop Baltimore running the ball. And when you can't do that, it's tough for you to get the ball back. Time of possession is normally a monster thing, and I think it was a 9-minute difference here. But there is nothing more demeaning than getting just punched in the mouth from an offensive line as a former defensive lineman and getting run on for that many yards. So that's, while I agree with you, I looked at the mistakes Jacksonville made, I also was just like, oh my God. I think it was my last year in the league in '93 with Miami. We went to play the San Diego Chargers, and I think in that game they ran for over 220 yards on us. And it was just a horrible feeling getting back on that plane, going back, knowing you lose the game and you get run on the way you did. So that's what I kind of took from that game last night. Lamar,
I even look at that, Dad. The Baltimore Ravens in the first half of that game, when things were in normal game flow, Jacksonville was doing a better job. Like, they've been run on. We talked about going into this game, going back to like the Bengals game that they lost. They got run all over by a bad Bengals rushing attack. In this game, you're going up against the number one rushing team in the NFL, and in the first half, you largely held up your end of the bargain. Like, I look at what the Jacksonville defense did. They weren't the problem. They got pressure on Lamar Jackson. They sacked him multiple times last night early on in the game, to him and affecting him. The offense just completely didn't hold up their end of the bargain. And you know how it goes, Dad. When you're the team that's the lesser talented group, and Baltimore is the more talented roster at this point, they're the better overall football team, you only get so many opportunities to keep the game within balance before eventually, if you give Baltimore enough cracks at this over time, and when the game score gets out of whack like it did in the second half, they're going to run out the clock on you. They're going to pile up the yards. So it got ugly late for them, but I think Jacksonville's defense doesn't have a lot to hang their head on last night.
Well, as you said, a lot got thrown on them because of missed field goals and on fumbles as well. But still, at the end of the day, listen, try and say that when I'm in film session and watching us getting run on, it didn't make me feel any better. Because you're right, this was a game. I mean, Jacksonville scores about halfway through the third quarter to make it a 10-7 game. So while it was 10-0 at half, it's still well within reach for Jacksonville, and they do make it 10-7. And then, you get one of those ridiculous plays by Lamar where how he escapes what he escaped and hits a long pass down the field to Isaiah Likely, who, by the way, was my spicy player of the week. And he had himself, 5 catches led the team in receptions, taking over for Mark Andrews. But he had a great catch after Lamar just Houdini'd himself like he normally does out of the pocket, and then Gus Edwards scores on a 1-yard run. They go up 17-7, and they shut out Jacksonville 13-0 in the fourth quarter. But it was like Jacksonville got in it, and Baltimore almost completely kind of said, no, we're going to kind of shut the door on you right here. And, of course, it's Lamar, who didn't have a throwing yardage, was 170-some, but ran. He was a leading rusher 12 times for 97 yards. And like I said, Houdini'd himself out of, pass rushes, which he has done his entire career anyway.
Sure, but it doesn't make it any less incredible. Dwayne Smoot, I believe, was the pass rusher for Jacksonville, and they had a great shot of him right after the play where Lamar goes up and under him, rolls out to the right, and then throws a YOLO ball. It's a total 50-50, and it might have even been 30-70 because Isaiah Likely had 2 defenders around him. It was a great play by Likely, too, but Lamar gave him the chance with a dot there, and they look, and Lamar's on the ground after. Dwayne Smoot's on his knees standing over Lamar, and he looks down, and you can see him mouth, how the hell did you do that?
Yeah.
Because he thought for sure he had him dead to rights, and at the very least, it was going to be enough pressure to not force the completion. It's why, Dad, we'll have an MVP conversation today, especially with the weekend Brock Purdy and the 49ers had. It's why Lamar Jackson probably statistically won't win it this year. Part of that is the weight of his own standard, what he did during his MVP season, the comparison that we usually have with those guys. But you watch the plays that he makes, and it's hard to argue there are guys more valuable to their team than Lamar Jackson between what he saw from him last night as a rusher and what he continues to do, navigating the pocket. They're rotating both offensive tackles on the Baltimore Ravens team right now. Like, as we look ahead for this team ceiling, Dad, they're the best team in the AFC right now. And they've been able to do it by being largely healthy, but last night you get the really unfortunate news. Keaton Mitchell, the outstanding undrafted rookie running back out of East Carolina, lost for the season to a really nasty leg injury late in that game. Ronnie Stanley leaves with a concussion. Marcus Williams leaves with a groin injury late in that game. You do start always worry about that because we've seen it undo Baltimore teams before, but they're going to have their day in court to be the AFC representative for the Super Bowl. They've played well enough to do that. We continue to see Lamar Jackson and Odell Beckham Jr. get more comfortable. Like you mentioned, post Mark Andrews, they're not a team I worry about, but that Keaton Mitchell injury, when you talk about their ability to win the Super Bowl, absolutely something that's going to factor in on the top end.
I agree. You know, we talk about injuries. Remember when the 49ers went through theirs and lost 3 in a row. Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams would miss time, but they're as healthy as they've been now. And you mentioned with the Ravens, I mean, the destiny is right in their control. They're the number 1 seed. But they have San Francisco, the Dolphins, and the Steelers. Well, the Steelers I'm not worried too much about, as we'll get into. But San Francisco and the Dolphins, you know, that's your game next Christmas. There's 3 games on Christmas next Monday, and that's the nightcapper. That's the highlight. Baltimore going to San Francisco. And you mentioned the injuries. You know Keaton Mitchell's going to be out. We'll see where Ronnie Stanley is, but he's been nicked up anyway. So a lot of it is how you deal with injuries, when injuries happen, and when you get any of those people back. You know, you're not getting Mitchell back for this run at all. So that's what makes this one, I think, difficult for them, because that's what they're looking at. We're all going to build this up, right, as the Super Bowl preview. Because they're both the number 1 seeds. They're both the 2 teams playing the best in their conference. San Francisco playing the best overall. But right now, they're the best. We sit there and do our top 4 every week, which changes all the time because of the games that happen, which is probably how it should go. But these are the 2 teams right now. I don't see San Francisco that changing. And with Baltimore, you know, we'll see. We'll see if the injuries start to stack up in the wrong positions. Remember, you already lost your top guy in Mark Andrews, though likely is filling in very well for them. So it is a game of attrition, which, again, the next big game of the season coming up this Monday after we just had 2 big games of the season this past weekend.
So they seem like the easy consensus best 2 teams in the NFL for a lot of people. But, Dad, I want to get to the other game yesterday that might be changing hearts and minds on that. Because if you wiped away the record right now and just went on how the team was playing, I think some people would make an argument for the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills get the win of the weekend, the one that we'll talk about the most, blowing out the Dallas Cowboys in a matchup that we had hyped up. Dak Prescott was rolling in as one of the MVP favorites. This Dallas team felt like it had turned a corner after the Philadelphia Eagles win, and they just completely lay an egg out there visiting Buffalo, Dad. And the Buffalo Bills still have an uphill battle to even get into the playoffs. But right now, they look like they are at worst the second best team in the AFC in terms of how they are playing on the field at this moment.
Buffalo sitting in the 9 slot as we speak. And again, for those that may not know, you take 7. They're sitting there at 8-6. The 7 seed, though, is the Colts at 8-6. Houston is 8-6 after their overtime win. So we had a bunch of 7-6 teams. Now we have a few 8-6 teams. They'll be battling for those last couple of spots. But that's been the thing with Buffalo, Mike. It's been which team is going to show up, and play what, because we've seen the worst of them, but we've seen the best of them, especially going up against a team like Dallas, who had been playing so well. I had one of those games too, in Detroit on Saturday, where Denver came in playing so well after a horrible start and just got smoked by the Lions. We'll get into that one. And that's what happened here with Dallas. I mean, playing so well. But what a difference at home, 7-0, on the road now 3-4. What a big difference when they have to go on the road, and now obviously trending toward being on the road in the playoffs because now behind Philadelphia. We'll see what happens with Philly tonight if Jalen Hurts is going to play against Seattle. But you know it's bad when you look at stats of a game and you say a player outgained a team. James Cook for Buffalo, I mean, unbelievable. Had over 179 yards rushing, 42 yards passing, 221 total yards. 221 total yards. Dallas had 195 total yards in this game. Dak threw his first interception in 5 games or something like that, as well as it was a bad one. But by then it didn't matter. By then everybody was saying, why the hell are you leaving the starters in a rainy, cold game when you're getting your butts blown out in this one?
Where
why
you had
not
already
just take
lost
him out?
an important player in Zach Martin early in that game to what looked like a really bad quad injury. I think he got kneed in the leg there. So to your point, you were already down a cornerstone piece.
Right. Yeah, you were. So, and he had told McCarthy after the game he's going to be fine. He didn't play the rest of that game, so I think he'll be back. But it's amazing. Mike McCarthy, everybody has him fired, a while ago. Now all of a sudden they're playing great, and there's a resurrection. And then in one game they get smoked here. All of a sudden it's Mike McCarthy's the problem again. I mean, the guy, he can't do anything. He can't do enough until he wins a Super Bowl. But that's what happens when you're the coach of the Cowboys, I think.
Well, I think for him and Dak, it's going to be hard for this team to beat the allegations right now that they are able to show up in big games. Yeah, they beat the Philadelphia Eagles, but we've seen they are far less than the Eagles team that we saw last year, even if the record is somewhat comparable. And, Dad, the Dallas big game performance, especially against the other elite teams in the NFL, it's going to stick out because of how it went down for them, too. They got pressured a bunch. This Buffalo defense, I think 5th in the NFL in sacks, so them getting to Dak Prescott as often as they did, especially post-Zach Martin injury, not all that surprising. And on the other side, Dallas, I feel like in the Dan Quinn era, when we've gotten to critical junctures, we've kept having to talk about the Dallas Cowboys run defense not showing up. I mean, you look at what Josh Allen did not have to do in that game for them to win. Josh Allen, who led the NFL coming into this game in total touchdowns accounted for between passing and rushing touchdowns, didn't have to do hardly anything but hand the ball off to James Cook. He said it was like the class project where I show up at the end and still get credit for an A even though somebody else did all the work. That's how impressive it was, because it seems like when you get this Dallas Cowboys defense, stay ahead of the chains on them, run it downhill at them, they've been much less effective when they're not turning the ball over and getting you into 3rd and longs.
So I think that's the biggest thing I'll point to in this win for Buffalo, because we're always talking about what's Josh Allen going to do. Is he not going to turn the ball over, especially in the red zone? Is he going to run and carry this team on his back running the ball? And he was the first one to admit it after the game, just what you said. I feel like the guy that got an A in a project where I didn't do any of the work. I think that was great for Buffalo as a team to get this kind of a win over a very talented team in Dallas without Josh being the main cog. So I think this was huge for Dallas to be able to do that. They just have to get the consistency back, because in the playoffs, man, if you're not consistent, you could be a one-and-done situation. And they've had more than a few games this year where they didn't look good. It only takes one time. And we could sit there and say talent-wise they're one of the top teams, but if you can't put it together in all the games, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you make those mistakes you were making and the turnovers that you had, and all of a sudden you're out. So that was the big thing to me for them, is getting that win without Josh Allen being the man. And this was another one I just mentioned on that other game. Baltimore running the ball for over 250. Buffalo ran the ball for over 260 yards in this game for another one for it was just a beatdown running the ball. It just sticks in my craw, Mike, as a D lineman when you get run on that much, no matter what the situation, it's just how horrible it is.
And now for Buffalo, the road is pretty clearly laid out in front of them right now. You look at the next couple of games for them and the next couple games in Miami. And if Buffalo handles their business and Miami slips up at all of a sudden we've got the final week of the season meaning as much as it ever has.
Mic'd Up Monday, brought to you by Wrangler, made for the ride of life. Save 15% on your first Wrangler.com order with promo code GOJO15. So we're going to use this week's Mic'd Up Monday segment to go through Saturday's 3 NFL matchups, starting in Cincy, where Jake Browning led the Bengals to a 27-24 OT victory over the Vikings, a team that cut Browning in 2021. And after the game, he was asked to reflect on if being cut by the Vikings served as some motivation for him.
There was definitely a little extra part of, just before the game, like I remember getting cut there the last time and just being told, like, hey, we might have a spot for you on practice squad, like go to the hotel and wait. And so I sat in the hotel for like a couple hours, not knowing if I had a job or not, and then just basically got a text or a call from my agent that they didn't tell me. Like I had been there for 2 years, and I've been cut my fair share of times, and that was probably the one. And there was a little bit more this week. I know I denied it, and there's some great people over there. It's completely different coaching staff and everything. And I want to emphasize, like, there are some incredible people over there, but that one felt good. I think right after we made the field goal to win the game, I screamed at a camera and said they never should have cut me.
I mean, that is savage that he just, like, they were like, yeah, we'll give you a call. And then they just were like, nah, well, he'll get the message.
I mean, that's one of those things, like, that's showbiz. Most people who have been around the NFL for any amount of time have some version of that story, or even uglier, as I know that you have in there. But it's also a good reminder that for everyone who gets to the NFL at this level, you got an ego. It's the only way that you get to this level, to get to a spot where now Jake Browning in a position to go out there and ball like he did in the third and fourth quarter and overtime, is by having that belief in yourself to where you take that situation and you absolutely throw it into the fire. And I love that he admitted it. We rarely get this moment from guys where they actually admit, yeah, this pissed me off enough to where I wanted to come back and rub your nose in it.
And you know what? There's going to be a lot of people out there getting on Jake saying, why are you in no position to be talking like that? And you know what? Yes, he is, because just as you mentioned it, everybody has an ego. He was undrafted in 19. The Vikings picked him up as a free agent, cut him, signed him back to the practice squad. Same thing happened in 2020. Cut him, brought him back to the practice squad, and now he's doing what he's doing. It doesn't matter whether you're a star, an average player, or a guy in the practice squad cut a couple of times. You have that, and I said it all the time, man, no matter if it's a amicable or not, you go against a former team, there's a little extra juice there. So I all for you, Jake, man. If you want that as a chip on your shoulder, and it really was a chip on your shoulder, because Minnesota twice had you, and Minnesota twice gave up on you, and now you got to beat them. Good for you. Enjoy that moment. And also, Mike, this is what you look at and what you want your backup quarterback to do. I remember last year doing the first game of the season, Dallas and Tampa Bay. Dak hurt his thumb, missed 5 games. Cooper Rush came in and went 4-1, right? And that's your backup quarterback can go in. His job is to keep your head above water until the starter comes back. Cooper Rush did more than that, going 4-1. I mean, that's pretty damn impressive. And now what Browning is doing, and may lead this team to the playoffs the rest of the way. Much like what's going on in Cleveland, where they're on their 4th quarterback, and with Flacco, and we'll get to that. Jake has got the boat the rest of the way here, and they're in the 6th slot. So, man, good on them. Nice job what the backup's doing and this team, because we kind of counted them out as soon as Burrow went out. You saw Jamar Chase with a shoulder walking off the field as well. So they're being nicked up a little bit. But T. Higgins, some of his stuff was ridiculous what he did. So kudos to Jake, man. You go ahead and do your thing.
Yeah, I mean, now I don't want to overstate. Like, Jake Browning has also subsisted by throwing a lot of screen passes, stuff around the line of scrimmage. Like, the rest of this team deserves a lot of credit because they've really helped pick it up. But he also made enough big plays down the stretch to absolutely get to talk his talk a little bit at the end of this. You mentioned T. Higgins, unbelievable catch by the sideline there to reach into the end zone to force, force overtime. Awesome there. And then the stuff on 4th and 1 on the tush push. The Bengals defense also deserves a lot of credit in this. Let's get on to the next game from this one. Jesse, we had Indianapolis with a win over the Steelers that look pretty damn lost right now.
Yeah, I mean, Gardner Minshew had maybe his best game of the season, okay? Tying a career high. He had 3 touchdown passes, helping the Colts take that 30-13 win. And after the game, Minshew was asked to grade his performance.
I was telling people in the locker room, at this point, it's winning games. That's all it is. However you got to get that done, we're going to try to find a way. So I grade myself off wins more than anything right now, and that's, so thumbs up.
Thumbs up. W equals A, okay? Doesn't matter. He's like, it doesn't matter what I do as long as we get that W.
Gardner strikes me as a pass-fail guy, like big fan of the pass-fail courses when he was in college. So that's the only metric for it, Dad. And he gets it done here, but really this game to me about the Indianapolis rushing attack. Trey Sermon taking for large stretches of this game as they've been banged up a little bit in their running back room. The Indy offensive line most of this season has looked back like the version from 2022 where Jonathan Taylor was an MVP, or 2021 where Jonathan Taylor was an MVP candidate, not 2022 where they looked lost.
Yeah, they rushed for 170 yards. We're going to talk about more than a few teams who have rushed for big yardage. They were another one averaging 5 yards a carry. Big thing from Minshew, no turnovers, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Hope Michael Pittman is okay on what happened that one play. DeMonte Kazee, the safety for Pittsburgh, hit him, and I don't think he had any bad intentions. It looked like Kazee was trying to go lower, and Pittman was coming down after he caught the ball. It was just a very, very scary collision.
Baker put him in a bad spot with that ball. That was, I saw people tweeting about that was your old-fashioned hospital ball right there. So
it was Gardner, not Baker. Gardner.
Yeah. Gardner, excuse me. Yeah, Gardner on that one. So, I'm with you, though. I don't think there was any ill intent there. Right. Steelers offensively looks pretty broken. Mitchell Trubisky turning the ball over more again. We talked about that being the biggest difference between him and Kenny Pickett, and you're seeing the rest of the offense wear the frustration for that. George Pickens, one of the guys involved in that. We've seen lackluster effort from Deontay Johnson in a couple weeks ago. So this group sort of spiraling late in the season here with a big struggle. Jesse, let's get to the final matchup from this one. Game that Dad was calling and turned into an absolute rout with Denver and the Lions.
Yeah, this one pretty crazy. So Dan Campbell and the Lions, obviously his friend and mentor, Sean Payton there. Now, Denver had won 6 of 7 heading into this game, but Detroit rebounding from their loss in a big way. They needed that one. Taking out the Broncos 42-17. After the game, Campbell was talking about what it meant to get this win for him and for his squad.
You have somebody you respect like I do him, and you've learned everything from. And in essence, you're doing the same things that he does with your own team. It feels good. But it's also, man, the ability for our team to win against somebody of his stature, Super Bowl winning coach, that does it right. Yeah, that's good. That's a good win, man. Because I know what he's about. So, I'm happy for our guys, that we got a W here when we needed it. Get to 10, and now we got 3 to go.
On to the next one.
Dad, you were on the call for this one here, and while we can talk about Jared Goff, what happened to this Denver defense when the turnover stopped coming, once again, it was the ground game and really the Lions rookie showing up big for this game.
Yeah, here we go again, 185 yards rushing in this one for Detroit, averaging just under 7 yards. So this was one, Mike, they had turnover issues, especially Jared Goff in the last few games. Of the 10 turnovers they had, I think in the last 3 or 4 games, he accounted for 9 of them. He played clean, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. We talk about, Mike, the offensive depth for the 49ers. How about for Detroit? The two-headed attack of Gibbs and Montgomery in the backfield. Amon-Ra St. Brown is having a monster year. Sam Laporta, the rookie tight end out of Iowa, stunner there out of Iowa tight end, is having a record-setting year. And Jamison Williams is coming along after the suspension early in the season. They have a lot of depth on that offense right now. And defensively, Mike, I've never seen a team in a game time up their blitzes so well where the opposing team could not pick them up and make their adjustments.
Yeah, no, Denver struggled mightily with that, so much so that we saw plenty of shots on the sideline of Sean Payton and Russell Wilson not having the most fun conversations in the world. So some of the air certainly let out of that balloon of a Denver team that had been riding high for a while. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Jesse Cofield holding it down here. And when we got off air on Friday, we were still talking in the abstract about the future for the Los Angeles Chargers and a lot of their brass. Dad, since then, obviously, they have decided to move on, not only from their head coach and Brandon Staley, but their GM, Tom Telesco, as well. So a full clean sweep for the Chargers in starting over anew. And, Dad, while we weren't surprised by that, I was surprised by the conversation that I was having after with some people about what we're walking into this offseason, because we've already got a handful of jobs with head coaching opening going into the offseason, one of them being this Los Angeles Chargers team right now. You also go along with the team like the Carolina Panthers, who notched a really sad win yesterday in front of nothing and nobody against a Falcons team that could be adding to this pile if they're not careful there as well. But I started to think about it, Dad. Is this Chargers job the unquestioned best job going into this offseason as it currently stands, or even factoring in other teams that could be involved? You know, we don't know what's going to happen with the Chicago Bears, let's say, and Matt Eberflus's future. The New England Patriots and Bill Belichick seem like they're on a collision course for an exit there. The Washington Commanders job could be freed up if they keep underperforming as well under Ron Rivera. But does Justin Herbert make this Chargers job the most appealing, hands down, to you?
Yes. I mean, that's what a head coach is going to look at. He's going to look at ownership, and he's going to look at the quarterback. You know, what do I have to work with? Mike Williams will be back next year. You have Keenan Allen. You have Austin Eckler. We'll see how they can manage the rest of the roster. The defense has certainly been the whole team has been underachieving. So, yes, Carolina's got a young quarterback in Bryce Young, a young team building. Las Vegas, if they don't bring Antonio Pierce down, somebody else. You have Aiden O'Connell. Is he going to be the guy? Are they going to give him the chance going forward, or are they going to change the situation? And then the maybes, Chicago, they're probably going to draft, even though, you know, Justin Fields plays well enough at times, and then you wonder why aren't they running him more, but they're going to go for no matter what anybody thinks. And I was one that said I think they should have given Justin Fields the chance this year to see what he can do. They're going to go in a new quarterback, so it'd be a new quarterback situation. You don't have a quarterback in New England unless you think Bailey Zappi is going to be the guy. And in Washington, it was Sam Howell. And again, those last three, they still have head coaches, but we're just kind of, hypothetical type situation of what the best situation is. So, I mean, to me, Mike, it's not even close that it's the Chargers, not just with Herbert, but with the rest of the talent on that offense, that's where I would want to go if I am a head coach that's given a choice.
Yeah, now, as some people have pointed out, and I saw Mina Kimes tweet about this over the weekend, they are in a tricky spot cap-wise next year for whoever comes in and is buying the groceries. They're about $40 million over the cap next year. Their top targets on offense are all on the older side, so you're getting older and more expensive. Because we know, Dad, the whole story with this Chargers team is they've been the all-name team for the last couple of years, offensively and defensively. But when you've had moves pan out like J.C. Jackson on the defensive side that have not had the production match the name value or the price tag, you start to get a little bit wary about what you're walking into there, even though you answer that question. So I agree with you. Among the jobs you've got out there, you could make the division argument because of who they've got to play every year in Patrick Mahomes, that could be a little bit of a tall order. But that would be the same if you were going to go for a Las Vegas Raiders team that still has some quality offensive weapons but doesn't have an answer or quarterback. The only one I think that could give me some pause in that would be the Chicago Bears if that job came open with Matt Eberflus losing his job, just because you've got so much draft capital. If you're a new coach coming in, you'd have a chance, and a new GM coming in, you'd have a chance to potentially influence your future on which quarterback you're tied into this draft. You'd have another top pick built in there. And the rest of that roster, I mean, you look at the way the offensive line and the defense have come together down the stretch of the season, and there's a lot to like about the trajectory of the current team.
How about Montez Sweat in that trade with Washington? They signed to that new deal. He has been something. 2.5 more sacks yesterday against, then again, when you're playing a guy like Joe Flacco, you know where he's going to be. But still, he has been a great addition. And it was kind of a head scratcher when it happened. Remember, why are they bringing in a high-value guy like that on a team that's going to probably start over at the quarterback position? But they gave him that new deal. You knew that was going to have to happen, and he seems real happy out there. So I would understand that, but still, I think you're starting with a rookie quarterback again. So that's why I just think, you're hitting the ground more running with the Chargers. So time will tell. We'll see what, right now it's Giff Smith, the O-line or the outside linebacker coach, who's the interim head coach. And I'm sure nobody believes he has a chance of being the head coach after this season. They'll go for a big name. And GoJo Wooden takes over as the interim GM for Tom Telesco until the season ends. And then we see what other changes are made.
As many people have pointed out, Giff and JoJo sounds like a buddy comedy or maybe like a buddy cop movie or something. The most hilarious head coaching and GM name combination ever. And yes, it is pronounced Giff and not Jiff, just like it should be. I don't care what the creator says. Dad, part of the reason, though, they were shown the door out there is because it's sort of and I always called this in the SEC West, it was the Nick Saban problem, where you had plenty of coaches in the SEC West that probably would have kept their jobs if they were playing against anyone other than Nick Saban's Alabama, who just was this unrelenting standard, much the same way that we've seen in the AFC West with the Kansas City Chiefs. And they got back on track yesterday, Dad. They get a win like we expected over the New England Patriots. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world. There were still some frustrating execution moments involving Kadarius Toney yet again, and you saw Patrick Mahomes on the side. It looked like mouthing every week it's something like this. So it still doesn't feel all the way right there, Dad, but I think that's also just what Kansas City's going to be this year. Not all the way right on offense, and you're going to have to hope the defense can make enough plays, and that when it counts, you get some of the quality Kadarius Toney moments like you got in last year's postseason, and that Mahomes can be enough to lift you over the hump on his own, which this year, given the AFC field, is not necessarily out of the realm of possibility.
You keep hoping the mistakes, you can fix them by the time you need them fixed, right? And one of the things we talked about was a few weeks ago when Kansas City was up right at the top of drop passes, that players could start catching the passes. Well, they're still dropping passes. Even Travis Kelce dropped one in the end zone. It was a little high, but off his hands. Travis Kelce normally catches a pass like that. You have drops and then the mistakes, like you said, with Kadarius Toney. Rashee Rice does look like he is that guy, though, right? As far as, and he's kind of been that guy, kind of leaning that way, but he has been the guy. 9 receptions on 9 targets yesterday. So it seems like they're really establishing he's going to be that wide receiver. Obviously Kelce, and then Pacheco didn't play again in this one. They'll get him back. I think one of the hardest runners in the league. They kind of remind me, Mike, of over in the NFC, the Eagles, to where, remember, these were the 2 Super Bowl teams, obviously, last year. Both now, Philly technically leading the division after the Cowboys lost as Philly gets ready to play tonight. Obviously, Kansas City leading their division, but neither one playing like the team we're used to seeing. So, but you keep giving them the benefit of the doubt because of how good they've been, that they'll get back to it. But you never know. You just don't know. But they certainly do not look like the teams that were playing in the Super Bowl last year.
No, and they sort of get a free pass in this game. Like, I was more concerned on the other side that you even allowed this many points to this New England Patriots offense that looked so hapless. Bailey Zappi in this game threw for about 180 yards. The Patriots defense, it's been one of the best in the league despite their offense. You almost even weight that even more because they're getting no help from the other side of the football. So Kansas City being able to go out and have some modicum of success, Patrick Mahomes throws for some stats that look nice against this Bill Belichick-led defense. That's still an impressive outing, Dad, but you're right. It's kind of like the conversation we'll have around MVP in the NFL this year is overall, everything feels a little bit down because of all the injury to quarterbacks around the league, because of just in general the injury and turnover we've seen. It doesn't feel like, and I know Tom Brady tried to make this a more existential thing. I just think it's one of those years where you had so many guys hurt at critical spots early on that the level of play overall for most teams is pretty down. And so it affects the way we look at it, because any other year, this Kansas City team would get force-fed its own teeth by any of its other former iterations of itself. But this year they've still got a chance to win a Super Bowl because the rest of the field's a little bit more down.
Yeah, there's still a lot of talent in this league that we've seen perform at a high rate offensively. So I agree. It's one of those years where it's down. The defenses, as I've been talking about, with some of their strategy and what they've done with stunts and with exotic blitzes has worked more this year. And maybe we have to look more at is offensive line a really down position in the NFL?
Yeah. Offensive line is down when you've got to stare down guys like Myles Garrett over on the other side every snap.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. We had some college football bowl game action this weekend, but maybe the most newsworthy moment happened prior to UCLA's 35-22 win over Boise State in the Starco Brands LA Bowl. So Bruins head coach Chip Kelly was asked how he felt about this being his last bowl game as a member of the Pac-12.
Is it sad? Like, a bunch of people couldn't figure out how to keep this conference together, and that's sad. You know, this conference has been together since 1915. This is an amazing game, and we keep trying to screw it up. And I'm talking about the administrators and the coaches. It's on us. But the fact that there's not going to be a Pac-12 next year, the fact that Washington State is not going to be in a conference next year, the fact that Oregon State's not going to be in a conference is we failed. And our job is to create opportunities for student athletes to be successful, and we didn't do it. And I think football should be separate from the other sports. Just the fact that our school is leaving to go to the Big Ten in football, our softball team should be playing Arizona in softball. Our basketball team should be playing Arizona in basketball. But because football left, and they're saying, well, how do you do that? Well, Notre Dame's independent in football, and they're in a conference and everything else. I think we should all be independent in football. And you can have a 64-team conference that's in the Power 5, and you can have a 64-team conference in the Group of 5. And we separate it, and we play each other.
You guys are familiar with this idea.
Yeah, and he told us the same thing in August. And I feel like this headline has gone viral like 3 different times, Dad, with Chip. He's been very giving and very consistent on this subject and what he believes should happen for the rest of college football. And this is the kind of scenario, the one super league that people have whispered about in college football for years now. But to see a guy who's been an integral part and one of the faces of the sport during my lifetime be the one putting his name on it, I do think lends a little bit more weight and a little bit more credence to it.
Well, he's 100% right, too. I mean, it's just thinking about, and the fact we went through it, the fact that the West Coast teams are going to have to travel to the East, and I don't mean football, which we've done forever, but other sports, the Olympic sports. I mean, it's ridiculous to sports that play during the week or sports that do multiple games on the road of where they have to travel to. It is crazy. There was such non-thought of every other athlete at these schools. It was just blinders on of football and money. And so I guess we shouldn't be shocked at that. So I agree with him. The question I would ask, and I agree this is going to happen, Mike. This is going to happen. You have to figure out who the commissioners are going to be for this. It's certainly, you're not going to snap your fingers and it's going to happen overnight. But this is the way to do it. He is absolutely right. It's the way to do it. My question is, once they separate football, and he talked about the football schedule, can the conferences go back to what they were? Can the Pac-12, for lack of a better term, reorganize so that, as they say, the horses are already out of the barn? Are the West Coast teams still going to travel to the East Coast? Does that not get fixed? So you do something better with football, something that should have been done, but you put this step in between of making the other athletes travel all over the country. Does that genie get put back in the bottle once they go to this new thing, which I think they eventually will?
It would be awesome to see basically just the conferences all geographically reassemble. It's like after an Avengers Endgame when all of a sudden you go back and you fix the past and everyone that turned into dust, spoiler alert, gets to come back. I would like to see it that way, Dan. I think it would make the most sense. I think it would be addressing the issue that we're talking about here as chief among the other sports. And for football, on the other side of all this, you think about what that would do too. I always think of scheduling. It would go the furthest in evening out what's always been college football's chief problem as we try and crown a champion is the scheduling is so uneven and so difficult every year to try and couch amongst these conferences that are so disparate that each and every year rise and fall, and we try and have these debates based on a couple of out-of-conference matchups of who the best conference is, but we never really have enough of a sample to know without a shadow of a doubt. And so we're always trying to grade these uneven tests at the end of every year, and we get a situation like we got this year with Florida State and Alabama on the back end of the college football playoff. So what he described there was big for that. And then the other part that he said that didn't get mentioned in this clip was we need to be revenue sharing with the athletes. He's like, they're the product. Right. The sport doesn't go without them. We should have been doing this for a long time. And when you look at so many of the things that people identify as the problems around college sports right now, where people say, oh, the NIL and the transfer portals, the wild, wild west, it's what happens when you ignore the main conceit of the sport, which is these are employees who are not being treated as such. And so when you've got to try and skate around that truth and the way that the NCAA and all the powers that be have been operating, you get these areas and these gaps in what happens and what should be happening that start to look like the current iteration to the portal. Like you look at over the weekend, Kyle McCord transfers from Ohio State to Syracuse now officially announcing that that's where he's going to land. Malachi Nelson, the former 5-star quarterback for USC, looks like he's getting ready to leave there. So you get all this volatility in the sport because you can't have real contracts, because they're not actually employees, because they're being paid by these pseudo employers and the collectives. And so they rightly get to move around a little bit differently than if you just said, yes, this is your job, you've got terms to the deal, and you can't just move freely because of that.
Yeah, I think the Kyle McCord one is weird to me. Is it you as well? I mean, you're starting quarterback at Ohio State and you go in the portal. You obviously were told something, right, of what was going to happen. But because why would you leave a team that just restocks talent after talent if you're going to be the starting quarterback?
So I need to find an article. It might have been the Columbus Dispatch that had an article that was documenting the things that went into this potentially with Kyle McCord. And I think it was this idea that he felt like, at least reportedly, should be paid a certain amount in the new NIL world, that quarterback valuations, guys getting like 7 figures in a season for being a top-end quarterback. And it didn't sound like Ohio State and Kyle McCord viewed him as a quarterback in the same way. Kyle McCord believes that he is one thing, and Ohio State believes that he's another. And based on what we've seen, Dan, I kind of understand Ohio State's thought process in this, which is, Yeah, Kyle McCord was a very good quarterback by college football standards, and by Ohio State standards, he was fine. Like we've seen, they've just had great quarterbacks. They've been one of the haves at that position. And so in this day and age, though, where it's like, all right, well, if you're not going to love me like that, someone will. Kyle McCord looked at the situation. Certainly what Syracuse is doing right now is noteworthy, and said, all right, I'll take my talents and potentially my bank account elsewhere.
Yep, that's where we are. It's like, NIL is free agency, with what can be offered. I guess the thing, because I had a daughter in a non-revenue sport in swimming, and we got to know so many of your friends from lacrosse and Sydney's and your guys' friends and Jake's friends from soccer and the other sports, that I do have a place in my heart for those sports, because those athletes work just as hard as football players do, or harder in some cases, but it's not a revenue sport. And the one thing I'll say is, no matter what system we get, football is always going to be okay. Football is always going to be treated the best because that brings in the most money. So for the most part, I'm not saying perfect, they're going to be treated okay. And the other sports are the ones that nobody's going to give a damn about, and they're going to get trampled on like they are right now. So I guess that's what I would like to see. Football is going to be fine. We've already gone through NIL and the portal, and attendance is still there. Ratings are still there. It's still an unbelievably popular sport. It didn't kill the sport, but man, what it's doing to the other sports and the other athletes going forward, of what they have to do now to compete in their sport they're working for, that's what kind of gets me. Football will be fine. Have a little bit of thought about the other athletes, which at this point they don't.
No, and I think that's probably the biggest byproduct of what Chip's talking about, is it simplifies the equation when you just admit what you've got in college football is a largely different entity than the rest of the sport. It is somewhere in between being a collegiate sport and an actual professional model. It probably is a professional model in a way that I think we've all acknowledged for a while, except for everybody who makes the decision. And again, when you won't admit that at the beginning of the conversation about all the way that this is structured, you see how out of whack it throws everything else, because people from outside of the sports, higher courts, attorney generals, all these people in the governments that now get to weigh in on what's going to happen with college sports, have understandably looked at this situation and gone, yeah, the way that you guys have been trying to treat the players at the center of this is completely unjustifiable, and we have begun tearing down the walls around your sport because of that, and now there's really nowhere left behind.
GoJo and Golic. The 49ers easily handled the Cardinals yesterday, 45-29. And it was another huge day for Christian McCaffrey. Surprise, surprise. He finished with 5 catches for 72 yards, 2 touchdowns, while also running for 115 yards and a score. And after the game, Brock Purdy was on the CMC MVP campaign trail.
Dude, I think Christian should be MVP. I really do believe that. You know, he does everything for us, runs the ball well, can catch the ball. He does everything. And so, in my eyes, that's an MVP.
Okay, guys, do you agree with Brock Purdy despite his hideous choice of shirt?
Oh, wow. We're going to take down the guy that's probably going to win his fashion choice here. Interesting.
I couldn't let him get away with that. I had to make a comment on it.
You know what? He is dressed like a character on I Think You Should Leave. Like, he looks like he got that shirt at Dan Flash's. So that actually checks out. Objectively not a great shirt, but, you know, again, fashion's different for everybody here, and he's trying to rock it with as much confidence as humanly possible. And you know what? I love that journey for him. Dad, I do love the message here. Like, this is the perfect humble teammate approach to the MVP discussion that's going to continue to swirl around Brock Purdy and the 49ers, because it's getting pretty difficult in this season, Dad, to look away from Brock Purdy in the way that this award's structured, right? Best player on best team. Brock Purdy basically leads the NFL in everything related to passing stats. He's first in passer rating. He has the most passing touchdowns. He's got the best touchdown to interception ratio. He's got the best yards per attempt, yards per completion. They've obviously won a bunch of games here. Even deep statistics, he's number 1, I believe, in completion percentage over expectation. He's number 1 in EPA per pass. Like, all these things that you could want, Brock Purdy's at the top of. So do you believe that he is right and that he shouldn't even be the MVP on his own team?
Yes, I do agree with that. And I think if the team voted for an MVP, I think Christian McCaffrey would be voted the team MVP for them. And that would be my argument. I think their own team would vote for CMC. He should be the MVP of the league. Now, you just mentioned Brock Purdy out in front in a lot of different ways. Not yards. Obviously, he's down a little bit in yards. I think he's second or third in that area there. Not where you mentioned first in a lot of things. And that's what we look for. Is there somebody who by far and away, is so much better statistically than other quarterbacks? Is Brock there in your mind? Far and away better than all.
So statistically, yes, like statistically he is. Like statistically, there's very little argument that he's not the MVP if you were to just go on that. But this is the problem, is he's got the stats to back it up. And he's on a great team and is going to win a ton of games and is no doubt incredibly important. But the other portion of the MVP debate we always have is it the best player or is it the player who's most valuable to their team? And you can absolutely construct the argument that, yes, Christian McCaffrey is more valuable to the team, or that there are other players and other quarterbacks who are more integral to their team's success than Brock Purdy is to the 49ers overall.
See, as far as when you take a player off a team, take Lamar Jackson off Baltimore. Take Dak Prescott away from Dallas. Take Jalen Hurts away from Philadelphia. Take any of the top guys away from their team, and they're not as good. Then do we just go to a degree of not as good? Take Brock Purdy off. They still have a lot of talent on offense, but still, Brock Purdy is playing well. So that's really not – I look at more the best player than what would you do if you take them off the team. Because any top team is going to be worse with their top player is going to be gone. So that's not, and I understand voters can do it that way. You if you're a voter, or even us who aren't voters, you're a voter in the Heisman, but not here in this MVP race. So we have our own opinion, and mine isn't take him off the team, because there's too many examples of, and so many teams would be worse without your star player. So I look for best player. And to me, it's Christian McCaffrey, because I think he's the best, because one of the things, he's the most versatile. He's averaging, 128 yards total a game. He's going to be in the area of 2,200 total scrimmage yards if he keeps going at that average for the last few games. Now let's see if they have everything locked up for the last week, if they play or not, whatever. He's going to be over 2,000 scrimmage yards on the best team in football. to me, I think I cut it down. It's certainly not as simple as this, but I do believe that the 49er players, all given a ballot, who's our MVP, they would say Christian McCaffrey. So I just think he's the MVP of the league and should win it.
Well, but I think to your point, Dad, it's because it's the idea of if you had to go out there and win without one of those guys, who would you be more comfortable winning without? I think that's the way that you're talking about that conversation there. Because with the 49ers, the difficult part of this is we've seen them very recently be successful with another man in the same context, almost exactly on that team right now. And Jimmy Garoppolo, who promptly went and then wet farted his way out of that job, obviously with injury factored in. But Jimmy Garoppolo did not look nearly as good running Josh McDaniels' offense with the Las Vegas Raiders, despite having one of the best backs in football, despite having one of the best receivers in football on that team, did not look as good without the helpful confines of Kyle Shanahan's offense. It's always going to be a factor in all of this, as is the starting point in here. Like, I think it always takes a while for us when talent and production don't match up, right? That can cut both ways. Like, we're getting to that point now with Trevor Lawrence at certain junctures. That was a really rough outing for Trevor last night on Sunday Night Football against the Baltimore Ravens. He is one of the best quarterback prospects I can remember in terms of ability and what was expected. But there's been a few too many moments at times where things like last night pop up where the production does not match that. But I still want this player to be something that maybe he's just not going to be on the top end because of any number of things that have happened early in his career. With Brock Purdy, it's much the same. There's not a dominant physical trait that you can point to with Brock Purdy. There's not any otherworldly ability with him. And so it's like a player, and I'm not saying he's playing as well as Tom Brady, but I'm saying Tom didn't have a defining physical trait. Most of the quarterbacks of that era, the Drew Breeses, the Mannings, didn't. And so you had to search harder to find the areas where they impacted a game enough to where you can point to and say, yes, that's the MVP quality there, versus the other quarterbacks we've got in this league, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. You can all look and clearly see, there's spots where they're physically doing things that only a handful of people on earth can do.
No, I do agree with that. I'll ask, you said Garoppolo, he had success with Kyle Shanahan and then not success away from that. Do you think Cam Newton was right then about Brock Purdy? That he's a game manager in that Kyle Shanahan offense?
I'm not going to get into that because that's a buzzword that people are going to color however they view the idea of game manager. I think that like a lot of the players that we're talking about in this operate in offenses with a ton of weapons, a ton of help. When you look at some of the stats about tight window throws and how guys are in terms of aggressiveness in that way, Brock Purdy's got a lot of peers in guys like Patrick Mahomes and others who work in offenses that will get them open throws or work in offenses. Now, not the Patrick Mahomes of this year who's operating in an offense with basically no help outside of Travis Kelce, but I mean in prior iterations of that when you had Tyreek Hill and you had the full complement of the best version of that Kansas City Chiefs offense. Like, Brock is not alone in that, and he's got some impressive throws under his belt, but we all have, again, seen the past with Kyle Shanahan where he's made it look good with a bunch of different people at quarterback there, even if maybe it hasn't reached these heights that Brock has helped them reach, and that's a complicating factor in this.
So you look for, I guess, an MVP, because it's normally a quarterback, the wow moments, the wow factor. And Josh Allen was the first to admit he wasn't a big part of a big win. They didn't need that Josh Allen to get this win against the Cowboys. Lamar Jackson comes up with a nice win over a division-leading team in Jacksonville. Doesn't pass or not that great passing. 14-24 for a $171 touchdown, excuse me, and an interception, but he runs incredibly well and has those amazing moments in the pocket to make a play down the field, and as we mentioned, ran for just under 100 yards. So I get those wow factors. Who would be your MVP right now?
Probably Brock Purdy. Like, I really don't know at this point because Dak Prescott would have been my vote before, but you go out and you lay an egg in this many big games, and at some point that's going to affect the way that you're perceived there, even if you played well. And again, it's how we're defining this. Brock Purdy's playing great football. He's got enough statistical support on this great team to back that up. Do I think that, like, 'cause this is the thing is, I'd be fine if Brock Purdy won the MVP this year. Totally fine. Like, he has played incredible football. He meets so many of the criteria that we talk about for this award. The thing where I'm always like, man, all right, when we brush it back is I think it was David Lombardi, the athletic beat writer that covers the Niners, said, does Brock Purdy have an argument to be the best quarterback in the NFL? And I won't go that far. No, like, absolutely not. Not in a world where Patrick Mahomes still lives and breathes and walks this earth and is somehow keeping this Kansas City Chiefs team in the conversation for winning a Super Bowl, despite the fact that we look around at the rest of the supporting cast there, especially on offense, and no, that's not the case. No, I think there are other quarterbacks that are more important to their team, even if they are not playing better football than Brock Purdy right now, if that makes sense.
So that's how you vote of how important they are to their team. Is that? And I'm not saying this in a way of like I disagree. I'm just saying, is that your criteria for this award? Well,
that's my criteria for if we're talking about who the best quarterback in the NFL is. Okay. Hey, what would your team look like without you? And like Lamar Jackson's the perfect example. You take Lamar Jackson out of that Ravens offense, and the whole house of cards comes crashing down. Now they've built it very specifically to his skill set, and there's absolutely something to be said for that. But I do believe he is more important to their success than Brock Purdy is to the 49ers' success, even if Brock Purdy is very important. Like, we're having a high-level conversation. Brock Purdy has outperformed anyone's wildest dreams for a player picked in his draft status. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, but I will not also be convinced that I'm the bad guy for not just readily saying, oh, yeah, he's the best quarterback in the NFL, because I don't believe that's true.
So, again, my vote would be for Christian McCaffrey, and the deck is certainly stacked against him. Since 2000, there have been 4 running backs that were MVPs. In 2000, it was Marshall Faulk. And then you actually had back-to-back years, Mike. 2005, Sean Alexander from Seattle. In 2006, LaDainian Tomlinson from the Chargers. And the last running back to win the MVP was 2012, Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings. So, and all the other times it's been a quarterback. So the deck, as I said, stacked against McCaffrey in this one, but I would have zero issue. And again, right now my vote would be for him for MVP.
Yeah, I like, honestly, if either of those guys won the award, I'd be pretty fine with it at this point. Because again, like, I understand none of this should be a narrative award. It should be a season-long thing. But, you know, another factor is like how you perform in the biggest moments. And last night or yesterday, I should say, for Dak Prescott in that game, it was a big moment on the road in an area that's been an issue for your team. And your team around you had some guys get banged up, had some issues. And we always talk about, hey, are you able to overcome that and offset some of those other issues for your team? One of the jobs of any MVP, but especially a quarterback, I've always said, is do you make the lives of the people around you easier on your team? And some of it's unfair to Dak Prescott because there were a lot of plays where he didn't have a chance last night. But at the same time, that's the MVP conversation we're having. That's the standard we talk about when you get to that level is, hey, are you able to get out of a couple of those situations and make something out of nothing when given the opportunity?
By the way, the last time it was not a quarterback or a running back was when I was playing in the league. 1986. As a matter of fact, it was not even an offensive player. Lawrence Taylor was the MVP. So he was the last non-quarterback, non-running back, and the last defensive player to win that. And then you go back, how about 1982? Mark Mosley, the place kicker for the then Washington Redskins. Is that amazing? That is unbelievable. So yeah, it's been that.
To look like that year for a kicker to win the award. Like, Justin Tucker is the greatest kicker I've ever seen in my life, and we would never flirt with the idea of him being the MVP because we are fortunate to have so many space aliens walking this earth playing football. Like, Dad, you could sell me in another lifetime where we actually fairly judge players across all positions. That, like, watching Myles Garrett yesterday at the end of that Browns win, Chicago Bears, knowing that he's been banged up down the stretch of the season with a shoulder injury, knowing that he's going to have every resource thrown at him, and his head coach Kevin Stefanski has spoken as much. Like, people do not understand how freakish it is in general what Myles Garrett is doing. you could absolutely convince me of throwing MVP votes his way as this Cleveland Browns team led by Joe Flacco now looks like it is capable of making its way to the playoffs and maybe even being froggy enough to get a win at this point. But if you look at like the most impactful player on that team, like, yeah, it's overwhelmingly Myles Garrett, who's a human, who's, again, like the aliens come down, the guy I want to send forward as our champion. So that's what I mean. Like, what world we had to be living in back then for a kicker to get MVP votes is sad, and I feel bad for the people that had to live through it.
It was also, it was a strike year. That certainly has something to do with it as well. No doubt about it. That was a strike year. And then in 1987, that was when we missed 4 games, and John Elway had won it that year. But I'm with you on Myles Garrett, and it's good for a defensive player to win it again like Lawrence Taylor did in '86. You're going to have to break the sack record. We've seen Deron Bland with a ton of interceptions already broke the record for pick sixes. He won't even be mentioned. I shouldn't say won't be mentioned, but he's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year. It's going to be one of those rush guys, right? Setting a new sack record, I believe, is the closest you're going to get to a defensive player winning MVP again. And to boot, nobody on the offensive side having that unbelievable year. Not one quarterback throwing up ungodly numbers. It's going to have to be compatible with that.
Yeah, exactly. You would need people to come down a little bit in the standard. This would have been the year for that, because of all the quarterback injury we've seen, because of how a lot of the teams where we were expecting them to be contenders maybe have shuffled back a little bit. But I look at who else is even out there for this, Dad, because Brock Purdy is going to have a great chance to make the statement against this Baltimore Ravens team, where on the other side, you've got a guy in Lamar Jackson who we put up in this all the time because of the way he impacts the game for that team. Brock's going to have a great narrative opportunity. The only one that seems maybe within ballpark because of the opportunity afforded to his team down the stretch could be if Josh Allen, who I know this weekend didn't have to do much, but in general has been Super Saiyan Josh and the driving force for that team. If the Bills somehow find their way into the playoffs, which would include a big win against the Miami Dolphins in the final week of the season, he would have his day in court for the award as well, and deservedly so.
Could the Bills take the division from Miami? They need to get within a game, right? And then they play the last game, and they could win that one and win the division. That would be a marker, especially if Josh Allen leads that team like yesterday. He did not. If they go ahead and do this and he is not playing unbelievable, that probably would hurt his chances. Though, do we think that Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey are going to hurt each other, split those votes?
There's a chance. I think most people are voting wise are always going to defer towards the quarterback. I don't think that's right, but I think that's reality. So that's probably going to be the case. I don't know if there'll be as much cannibalization just because, again, best quarterback on right now what is inarguably the best team in football is usually a pretty hard standard to beat when it comes to the MVP. Now, you mentioned for Buffalo the chance to win the division. The Dolphins' last 3 games, Cowboys road at Baltimore, and then home versus the Bills. If they lose one of those 2 games against the Cowboys or the Ravens, which is a very real possibility, then that last game of the season would be for the division. And that's one Buffalo. They beat them earlier in the year when we were still worried about the trajectory of the Bills. Now they'd be facing what feels like the final form for them under the Joe Brady-led offense now.
Which would be what a difference of getting that home game, right? Of it being in Buffalo or being in Miami. Certainly a difference there for a home team of what you get to play in at home. So the rest of the 3 more games, after tonight, 3 more games getting very, very interesting. We finally have our first clinches and our eliminations. Just for everybody's edification, we have eliminated from the playoffs is Washington, not shocking, Carolina, Arizona, the Jets, which brings us obviously to the Aaron Rodgers question. The New England Patriots have been eliminated. Tennessee has been eliminated, and we know that Philly and Dallas both made the playoffs. Before Dallas even played their game, they clinched a spot, and Philly plays tonight, and they clinched a spot, and it's San Francisco has clinched the division already. So we're finally in that realm of who's eliminated and who is clinching spots.
Yeah, I can't imagine Dallas felt too much like partying after the game last night and celebrating that moment. So kind of the European soccer model that we've seen pop up in the Olympics where American fans always have to digest. You can move on out of group play even if you're tying or losing at the end of that, and it doesn't always feel sweet. But, a lot of people punching their ticket, finishing up the season now as we march towards the end. Who's getting started on draft prep? Who's getting started on postseason prep? Who is joining our all-weekend team? We name that next.
To GoJo and Golic, it is time for the guys to take a look back at the past couple of days and give us their all-weekend team. So, fellas, we have some honors to hand out. Who's going to get them?
Yes, big-time weekend, both on and off the football field, Dad, with plenty of stuff to get to and celebrate here. So we'll go honorable mention, first team, second team, and then first team, because I can count and I can do math. And starting off, Dad, I'll go off the field here and go to the great state of Texas. The Texans women's volleyball team goes back-to-back as national champions. They get it done against Nebraska Cornhuskers women's volleyball team that has nothing to hang their hat on this season. We know how important to the sport's growth and development they've been. The game at the football stadium earlier this year that set all sorts of attendance records for women's sports worldwide. But give the Longhorns their credit. They went out there and got it done in a big-time clash of two of the best teams in the entire sport.
Yeah, it was very cool to see, and they ran them 3 games to love on this one. I mean, it was as far as that was concerned, wasn't even a contest there. So we talked about the semis last week and how good they were, and then for Texas to go back to back is pretty impressive. And I'm sorry your name is escaping me, but one of their top players before last year won a title at Kentucky. So I believe this was her third championship in a row, I think, if I'm getting that correct. But what a dominant performance. It's so much fun to watch, and we've got into it even a little bit more with our buddy Marcus Spears, right, Mike? His daughter was the number one volleyball recruit in the country. So that was very cool. He was over social media with pictures of her. That was a very, very cool thing to see. One of the young ladies on the Texas team is the daughter of Jermaine O'Neal, former NBA player. So it's very cool to see when you start to know some of these people and it's their kids, who are getting these accolades.
O'Neal, one of the members of the all-tournament team as well. So who do you got for your honorable mention here, Dad?
My honorable mention is going to go to Joe Flacco. 374 yards in this game. He did have a few interceptions, but a couple of touchdowns. I need to know, because I haven't looked it up, and I'm sure someone would find it quicker than me. What's the last 4 quarterback team that made the playoffs? Because that's where the Cleveland Browns are. They're on their 4th starting quarterback, being Joe Flacco. A few weeks ago was watching games on the couch and is now leading the Browns, who are in the 5th slot. Baltimore is going to win that division, but the Cleveland Browns are the first wild card right now in the 5th slot. 2015 Houston Texans was the last team. Yeah, that's how about that? That's well done. Thank you for that info.
Was that like the TJ Yates team that ended up making the postseason too? That's right. That was when. Wow. So it was Brian Hoyer, Ryan Mallett, TJ Yates, and Brandon Weeden were the 4 quarterbacks for that Houston Texans team that ended up making the postseason and getting there. So that is some insane company for this team. But you're right, Dan. I do think we get even more degree of difficulty here for the fact that Joe Flacco is as old as he is, came off the couch in the circumstances that he is, and the backdrop of like Deshaun Watson, the contract, all these complicated factors for this team.
How about Joe Flacco coming off the couch, leading Cleveland to the playoffs, and they're signing a check for Deshaun Watson every week? It has to be like a poison pen writing that thing. It's just horrific.
Yeah, writing a check to a guy who Joe Flacco has come in and eclipsed the amount of 300-yard games, 3 touchdown performances, anything that Deshaun Watson has done as a Brown, Joe Flacco has come in and done better, including in some clutch moments yesterday. That throw and catch to Amari Cooper late in that game to help get them back into this. One of the best you'll see all season, an absolute rip. My second team pick, Dad, goes to Montana's very own Junior Burgeon, the wide receiver, punt returner, kick returner extraordinaire for this squad, who's been an absolute monster through the majority of this postseason run for a team that now is going to get to play South Dakota State for the FCS National Championship this year. Multiple punt return and kick return situations, as you can see right here. 5 punt return titles. 4 rushing touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns. Had the 2-point conversion pass that was an awful throw, bounced off the hands of the defender, and picked off, but got in there. But in a game where he already had a return touchdown and a receiving touchdown, has been one of the stars of the FCS postseason, as now gets the chance to add national champion to that resume.
That is really impressive. You got it. Having doing something like that. Talk about being in the zone and having it going right. That so cool. Congrats there. My second team is going to go to Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield led this weekend in passing yards. Completed almost, 79% of his passes, 22 of 28, 381 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. And still, we all love the scrappy way he plays as well. Players love him. And right now, amazingly enough, they're not under 500 while leading the division. They're leading the NFC South with a 7-7 record. Behind them is New Orleans at 7-7, and they play in a couple of weeks. The Tampa Bay Bucks, they finish up with Jacksonville, New Orleans, and Carolina. Now, they beat New Orleans earlier in the season, but a chance for New Orleans in a couple of weeks, seeing what happens after next week. But right now, Tampa Bay leading the division, and Baker Mayfield making that statement from Cleveland to Carolina to the Rams. Now Tampa Bay trying to tell Tampa Bay, hey, you don't need to go out and get a quarterback. I can be your guy. He is definitely making a case for that with the toughness in the way he plays, even though we all kind of know how he is as a player. He's making it very interesting for Tampa Bay. So kudos to him, man, just going out and getting the job done.
I do wonder how Buccaneers fans feel about that, because he's been scrappy. But like you said, this is a team that's barely over 500 in the worst division in football. You're not going to be in position to draft any of the top quarterbacks in this year's draft. So he's probably going to be your guy. And it's incredible what he's done. He's an adult in the room at that position. He's got all the moxie and stuff that you could want there. But you do wonder what it means on the high end for them. But an awesome weekend for him, no doubt. He's gone out there and I think silenced a bunch of critics this season with the way that he's played, especially down the stretch here. I, for my first team pick, Dad, am going to go back to our alma mater this weekend. Very cool moment for one of the best coaches in my lifetime on Notre Dame's campus. Former women's basketball head coach Muffet McGraw, now cemented forever in South Bend. She becomes the first female coach at Notre Dame to get a statue put up in her honor. She's going to have her statue outside of Purcell Pavilion, the basketball arena where the men's and women's teams play at Notre Dame, for her contributions to that school. Obviously a two-time national champion, someone with multiple Final Fours on her resume, and one of the faces of women's basketball in my lifetime. Obviously has been a huge advocate for women's athletes in general when it comes to the things that she's been willing to say and do with the microphone at the top of the sport, but also one of the fixtures in terms of accomplishments in women's basketball in this era.
Yeah, and by the way, still when she talks, I think she scares people, doesn't she? I mean, because she will speak her mind. She will absolutely speak her mind. Love her to death. She is fantastic, been fantastic for that university as well.
848 career wins. She was inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in 2017, the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame in 2011. So congratulations to Muffet, who set the standard on that campus in my lifetime.
And I'm going here for my first team just because I grew up in a time, and it's been a lot of time, even after I left there, of how bad the Cleveland Browns have been. I'm giving my all-first team, weekend first team, to Kevin Stefanski, the head coach of the Browns. They got their 9th win yesterday, so that means they're going to have a winning season. Worst they can do is 9-8. He is now the first Browns coach, and he hasn't been there all that long, the first Browns coach with multiple winning seasons since Marty Schottenheimer for 86 to 88. The first one. And I know there may be some that, seriously, you're congratulating a winning season. Yes, I am, because I grew up in Cleveland. I know what it was like there and how bad it's been there for a long time. So, again, winning seasons, which doesn't seem like it should be that hard to do. It's the first since the mid-'80s. So that's how impressive it is in Cleveland, where I grew up. So maybe a little biased that way because growing up knowing how bad it was, Mike, but kudos to Stefanski for doing that.
I mean, when you look at, we always do the laundry list of Cleveland quarterback names on that sad jersey from the graveyard. The list of coaching names and records is almost as sad at so many junctures. So you're absolutely right. To do it, like we said, 4 different quarterbacks over the course of this season in a tumultuous year in the AFC, absolutely hats off to Kevin Stefanski.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Week 15 comes to an end with an NFC clash on Monday Night Football. So we got the Seahawks hosting the Eagles at Lumen Field. Seattle on a 4-game losing streak, not great. Philly has lost back-to-back games after their red-hot start to the season. And Jalen Hurts is questionable with an illness, but he was on his way to Seattle. So he left separately from the Eagles team charter from Philly, allegedly because he didn't want to get anybody else sick. So guys, going into this one, I cannot help but just imagine Jalen Hurts with the meme coming into mom's room in the middle of the night saying, I froed up. So apparently Jalen Hurts is throwing up. What are we going to do?
I love the thought of him walking up to Nick Sirianni's offense, and you just see the silhouette of him like a child walking into their parents' room at night, telling them that he's thrown up all over himself. Which, by the way, every parent has my undying respect for somehow weathering that storm of your child either coming into your room after having a bad dream or being sick and waking you up out of nowhere in the middle of the night and not knee-jerk punching them in the face as if they were some home invader there. I don't know how you guys lived through that, Dad.
Well, listen, I mean, you live with more than that. I mean, I still envision the one night where Sydney came in at a very young age, not feeling good, and was going to throw up. And, as a parent, you want to get them to throw up in the right place so you're not cleaning up afterward. So there was nowhere around. So Chris just put her hands out and caught the throw up, just caught it all in her hands so she could get it. But you don't even think about it. You just do it because you're just going to, more work is going to be created later. If you let it splash all over the floor, then you have to clean that up as well. How many times I've had to get the Bissell out because of the dogs doing something. So it could be the same thing with the kids. So yeah, you don't even think about it. You just catch the throw up and you move on. So I'm sure that's what Nick's doing. Said, I'll catch the puke as long as you're playing in the game. Get better and play in this one because the Philadelphia Eagles, even though the last 2 games they lost and they got smoked by the Cowboys last week, they control their own destiny. They play Seattle, and then they play the Giants, Arizona, and the Giants. Listen, if you're going to do anything in the playoffs, you need to win those 3 games, right? I mean, you give up one of those, which should be wins for you, you got more issues than what you think. So they control their own destiny. Let's see what happens tonight, because obviously Seattle is fighting for a spot as well. They're sitting in the 9th slot at 6-7, and the 7th slot is the Rams. And they played one more game at 7-7. So it's tight there as well. So a big one for Seattle.
Yeah, and obviously for them too, quarterback situation up in the air. It looks like Drew Lock could be the inside track to start again with Geno Smith still dealing with that groin injury, which is a huge factor. Drew Lock's played well in stretches, but this team also looking to get healthier at running back and some of those other spots to help out. Dad, I think Philadelphia wins tonight, and I think what you just laid out is the most important part of that is they're the team that probably, especially when you look at them in San Francisco, desperately needs not only the home field advantage that comes with the 1 seed, but the bye that comes with the 1 seed, because we've talked so much about how a lot of the Eagles' flaws this year have been due to injuries to guys like Dallas Goedert. We've seen Lane Johnson deal with injury late in this season, and obviously you're headlined by Jalen Hurts with the knee that's been bothering him for most of the year. Getting that extra week at this juncture would go so far for this Eagles team if they're going to try and push past a 49ers team that is objectively better than them right now.
So, and again, another point to make, what is one of the big things we've talked about during this year was the amount of backup quarterbacks that have played, right? We've talked about there's been a couple of teams now that are on 4 different starting quarterbacks. Cleveland and I believe Minnesota has joined that group as well. So we've had a bunch with 2, some with 3, and a couple with 4. But so going into the game tonight, because we're not sure if he's going to play, but right now, up to this point, what do all these teams have in common? They're all division leaders right now. Miami, Baltimore, Jacksonville, Kansas City, Philadelphia, Detroit, Tampa Bay, and San Francisco. They all have all had their starting quarterback the entire year. All those leading division teams have had their starting quarterback. So it certainly means something. While I don't think ratings are going to be down or anything like that, people are still going to watch. How good your team is certainly is going to be affected by what quarterback is on the field. I think that's a no-brainer. We know that. And that's one of the consistent things we've seen with all the division leaders right now.
Yeah, I think we see in every league that this is true and in almost every level, but the NFL, because of the inherent violence of the sport, the health of your roster overall is such a determining factor once we get to the end of the season of who ends up being primed for one of these postseason runs. It's why what we've talked about with the Cleveland Browns has been so impressive, because I think they lead the league in terms of the percentage of their salary cap that's on IR right now and are somehow still going to bat. Obviously, the quarterback being out has an outsized effect on that, but it's exactly what you're talking about. The teams that have managed to have their quarterback consistently available in a year where that has been the most league-wide difficult thing to try and grapple with have absolutely been the best ones going for this one tonight. So, Dan, I think for Philadelphia, in terms of what they can do tonight that also projects well for them going forward, and the thing we've talked about that even in the loss to the Dallas Cowboys, that I still said felt better than their loss to the 49ers, is it looked like with Dallas Goedert coming back into the lineup, with some of the early decisions, now we'll see with the illness involved if they're as willing to rush Jalen Hurts the way they were willing to early in that Dallas Cowboys game. But those were all signs to me of a team that was getting back to some of the things that have been successful for them. The biggest wild card tonight is going to be on defense, as we got the headline coming out leading up into this game that apparently they have now moved Sean Desai into a slightly different role, who had been their defensive play caller. And Matt Patricia, they phrased it a bunch of weird ways, like he would be handling the communication into the green dot player. It sounds like Matt Patricia is going to be calling plays for this defense in a move that this late in the season, Dad, doesn't seem like something that a double-digit win team should be doing.
Yeah, there was a point I couldn't figure out. Was he just relaying what Sean Desai was telling him in the booth, and he was relaying that into the green dot player on defense, or was he calling them? I've seen both explained in different articles there, and obviously since not calling this game, you don't have access to talking to the coaches that you would if you're calling the game. So yeah, it seemed weird, but you're right. I mean, it does seem odd to mix and mingle right now when, oh, by the way, you're still 10-3. But that side of the ball has really, really been struggling. Certainly been hurt by injuries, but struggling with play as well. So we'll see what happens here against the Seattle team, which, I mean, my God, look at the way we were talking about them 4 weeks ago. They were 6-3, but now they've lost 4 straight, so reeling, and may not have their starting quarterback either. So this is the time of season, man, survival of the fittest, who's able to make it out on the field. But at the end of the day, we may have a Drew Lock against Marcus Mariota battle at the quarterback position here.
That sounds more like a Thursday night matchup based on what we've had for the majority of the season. Yeah, exactly. Say mercifully, Al Michaels kept very far away from this one. But you know what? It is interesting, Dad, thinking about that defensively, because Nick Sirianni's no stranger to making bold changes in the middle of the season. The way that he addressed offensive play calling 2 years ago was a big part of the Eagles' run that started to lead towards the Super Bowl appearance from last year. But with this one now, I do look at so many of their defensive issues as much more personnel-based than anything else. Like seeing, obviously injury. They're not going to have Darius Slay out there tonight, I believe. I think that's correct. And then what we've had at linebacker and really at the nickel spots for them, all to me, like that's a Jimmy's and Joe's thing, I think, far more than it's been an X's and O's necessarily. Obviously, Sean Desai has had some culpability in this as the play caller. But for Matt Patricia, as many have pointed out, at least he's calling defensive plays and not offensive plays this time around, if he is the play caller.
That's very true. Stick to the side of the ball, But you're right. You trade for Kevin Byard around the trade deadline and the DB. You pick up Shaq Leonard a couple of weeks ago when he's released from the Colts. So when you're making moves like that, you've had some issues. You lost Gardner Johnson, one of your DBs from last year, over to Detroit, who unfortunately got hurt in week 1, but may start practicing next week for Detroit. Be nice if they got him back. But yeah, I agree. I think it's been more of a Jimmy's and Joe's. Not so much that front. That front is they have kind of been as advertised. I mean, between great play and depth as well.
Yes. All right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you off on to the rest of your day. As always, download, subscribe, rate, review, leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on DraftKingsNetwork.com, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, the DraftKings YouTube channel, and more. But if you miss us or any of the great guests that we usually have around here during the week, you can get us wherever you get your podcast, as well as right here on the YouTube channel as soon as we are done with the live show. We will get to one of the signs that the apocalypse is nigh very quickly here after we tell you about our friends from Wrangler. We're brought to you by Wrangler jeans, shirts, and jackets made for the ride of life. You can be ready for cooler days and longer nights in styles that'll keep you warm, comfortable, moving and looking great no matter where you are. You can wear Wrangler jeans literally anywhere, out at night, playing a pickup game with friends, or at home, watching the game on TV. They're that comfortable, they're that durable, and there's a Wrangler shirt for every occasion. You got casual tees, the snaps at button-ups. You can layer them together, get the best of both worlds. It's all deadly. Go ahead and do it for yourself. And while you're at it, don't forget about the iconic Wrangler jackets. When that weather starts to chill and you need to venture out, Wrangler will keep you ready for anything. So add some Wrangler to your getup. Jeans, shirts, and jackets that look great, fit great, and move great, so you're always ready for whatever life throws at you. And you can save 15% on looking good with your first Wrangler.com order when you use promo code GOJO15. Wrangler for the ride of life. And the ride of life, guys, last night took us to something we have not seen since the before times. Steph Curry had his streak of games with a 3-point field goal end. For the first time since 2018, Steph Curry went 0 from beyond the arc. He was 0 for 8 last night in the Warriors' win. Curry only had 7 points in the game, but they still won their first set of back-to-back games for the first time since November 4th. So, Dad, kind of like we saw from Josh Allen last night, always good when your best player doesn't need to be on their A game to win, especially given what we've seen from Golden State. But Steph Curry not hitting a 3 is something that doesn't compute to my peanut brain.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, when that wide receiver has that long streak of at least one catch in a game and it's getting down maybe in the game and they haven't had a catch, you could just throw them a nice easy hitch just to extend the streak, and coaches will do that. I mean, it's not like he didn't have his chances. He took 8 threes, so he had his chances to make it, to continue. It's not like he didn't shoot any. He just didn't make it, but it seems so wild to me that he could take 8 shots and not at least hit one of them. We know shooters have off nights, and what do? They just keep shooting through it. But 2018, 5 years since he's last not had a 3 in a game, blows my mind when you think about it. It's incredible.
But now the pressure's off, right? Streak is over,
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
268 games in this one. His streak began December 1st, 2018 at the Detroit Pistons. He also recently made his 3,500th career three-pointer this season. So he's got every accolade. He's going to go down as the greatest shooter in NBA history. He's got all those things there. But it just, kind of a sign of the times, I think, for the Warriors in general, where this streak coming to an end in this season feels appropriate, given the fact that for a lot of reasons, we wonder if this could be the end of the current Warriors' big three in the iteration that they've been so used to. But, Jesse, that is not the only basketball headline we've got to get to, so what do we have for that?
Yeah, from one of the best basketball players ever to the opposite. So, early last week, North Dakota State men's basketball, they made the news when they posted a tweet of the final score of their game versus Oak Hills Christian College. The score in question, 108-14. Okay, Oak Hills is a school of 100 students. It's not part of the NCAA, but the ACCA, Association of Christian College Athletics. And unfortunately for Oak Hills, obviously the results of this not great. Some highlights came out that were not highlights and also were not great. And when you see something like this, it's kind of like, should we, do we even want to put this out there? Should we be showing this to the internet? This school has 100 people that go there. So I think, if anyone wants to be on the basketball team, they can.
You know what the funny part about this is, though, is it's not like they got whooped by some basketball powerhouse like Kentucky. It's not like one of those pay games early in the year in college football season. Like North Dakota State, I got to be honest, I have no familiarity with their basketball team whatsoever. This school grappling with the fact that their football program isn't playing in the FCS title game after losing in the semifinals and the standard around there for that team. But I have no clue what their basketball team's supposed to be. I don't think they're supposed to make this team go out and look like the Washington Generals, though, Dad.
Well, after that win, they were 7-4, and Oak Hills Christian was 0-4 after that game. Some of the stats are amazing. The Oak Hills Christian got outscored 60-5 in the first half, 48-9 in the second half. They shot 6 for 49 from the field, 1 for 20 from three-point range. And if you get a chance, watch the highlights. They're all over the place. And I feel bad for the play of the Oak Hills Christian team, but it was just horrific. Horrific. What the threes they were throwing up, the layups they were missing, the passes and ball bouncing off their feet. But I guess, again, with 100 people, you thought maybe you could find a couple that could play, and I guess a couple that could play maybe rec league, unfortunately. But they're struggling as a team. But by God, Mike, they're out there trying.
Only one kid on the roster is over 6'4".
I mean, you saw some of those jumpers out there, too. Like, I know, like, there's that famous line from Major League, like you saying Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball. Apparently, Jesus has trouble knocking down from beyond the arc, too, taking people off the dribble. Like, I remember vividly at the Catholic middle school that my sister and brother went to, there was a picture of Jesus going up and, like, swatting some kid shot into the student section in one of the hallways surrounding the gym in the background there. They might need to call the Heavenly Father up off the bench because right now his sons on earth aren't getting it done.
No, it's really bad.
Only three players scored for Oak Hills Christian. One had 7, one had 4, the other had 3. That was it. Everybody else pulled the donut.
The head coach doubles as a faculty advisor and instructor for the business program.
Well, okay. Helping
you know what?
Mold
the more you can do.
Yeah.
And you know what, Dad? This is an easy opportunity to go the LeBron James route for everybody in here. I did not even know that this delineation of basketball or league occurred or existed, but you can easily fall back on the route because of the religious affiliation of the school, that this is bigger than basketball, and we're trying to build future leaders of tomorrow in the church, and any number of things that LeBron James might say if he were in the same situation.
Sure.
You can fall back on here if you were this school. Jesse, let's get to the third here and talk about another surprise visitor that someone has enjoyed in their home recently, and it wasn't mine for once, which is nice.
Yeah, so a family brought home their Christmas tree. They went, and picked it out, and then they brought it home, and, you cut it open, and you decorate the whole thing, and it's all great and everything. And then a couple days later, someone's looking at the tree, and they're like, what is that? It was an owl. There was a baby owl in the tree, just sitting in the little tree, hanging out. And so the whole thing's decorated, everybody. And look at it. Look how cute it is.
Wow.
Yeah, so they found this baby owl in the tree. The owl is perfectly well. They called, who'd you call, GoJo?
Animal Control.
Animal Control, Ghostbusters, whoever you call. And they come and they took the baby owl and they brought it and released it into the wild. So the story has a happy ending. But I just got to say, my 19-month-old daughter, is obsessed with owls. We have an owl, a fake owl, in our Christmas tree, like shoved in there. And I was like, man, if this had happened to us, we have a fake tree, so it wouldn't have. She would have been delighted. Yeah. She would have been delighted.
I feel like an owl much higher up on the list of things you'd like to encounter than I saw the one tree that got posted where somebody, in keeping with the tradition I've established this year, had the possum show up in her tree.
Yep. Yeah, I saw another one where praying mantises hatched, and they were just all over the tree, like hundreds of them.
It's just got to freak you out. Yeah, again, if you go chop your own tree down or buy one on a lot, it's still a live tree that was chopped down somewhere. So at times you don't know what's inside of it. But that was a very cute owl.
It was adorable.
That was very, very nice. But happy ending. The owl got released out, and back into the wild. But boy, what a shocker that had to be. That would make you gasp a little bit.
A bunch of praying mantises hatched on a tree?
Yeah, I'll send you that.
That would.
I'll send
I'd have
you
to
that.
burn the tree.
Yeah, I feel like
No,
you just got to throw the whole tree out, ornaments and all.
and burn the house down
Yeah.
if it was in the house. Yeah.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I found out yesterday that when possums want attention, they sneeze, which is about the cutest thing on earth. We think you're all cute. Download, subscribe, rate, review. Enjoy Monday Night Football.